Is it Minnesota nice to call a traitor a traitor? That was the question I asked myself yesterday before I posted an earlier post that called Pete Stauber, our congressman, a traitor. I am nothing if not Minnesota nice, although I've always preferred to think of myself as Midwestern nice since I was born in Kansas. I think nice is dangerous when it interferes with admitting the truth. And I saw that truth burst out in the open in 2016 when a man unfit for public office BS'd his way to the Oval Office. His cult status today among his hardcore supporters only confirms my fears. Although they are slipping away, they have been reforming like an amoeba for some new, more palatable leader to coalesce around. And so I called Pete Stauber a traitor in a post. That was a step up from what I'd earlier suggested, that he had been involved in treason. It's clearly name-calling, the word traitor, but if the shoe fits. On my blog, I included a link to a Washington Post column titled, "They Are Preparing for War," that I happened to read today. The article describes the kind of nations where dictatorships arise. I've always comforted myself by thinking it couldn't happen here. But the story pointed to an example I'd not thought about before. Literate, well-educated, and democratic Germany in 1933. The author's father was there in 1933. In 2016, as he watched the rise of Trump, his memories flooded back to Adolf Hitler, who won the same 30% hardcore Donald Trump has. It was all Hitler needed to snuff out Germany's fragile post-World War I democracy. Up to now, I've made the mistake of thinking an American Civil War was unlikely because America had a Mason-Dixon line slicing between two halves in 1860. Today, the difference is more urban versus rural. But the abortion issue demonstrates that states could create their own election rules, allowing Republican minorities to gain control. Would urban America fight this any harder than the German middle class fought Hitler's rise? I just don't know. I've been listening to the people who rushed to Washington, D.C. to overthrow our government. Most of them felt the election was stolen. They were wrong about this, but that's little comfort to me. But Pete Stauber, our congressman, knew better. And yet this SOB was going to strip the properly elected electors from 4 states and give them to Donald Trump. Traitor is only one of a dozen vile but accurate descriptions I could give this man. Chicken shit is another one that comes to mind. I'm older and wiser than I was when I was young and hid behind niceness to avoid conflict. We had this 6'8" giant in my fraternity. One night, he came home to the fraternity house to brag about how he'd scored that night. He'd just come back from his date. He drove his date out on the farm roads outside of Mankato in the dark. He shut off his car, pulled over to the side of the road, and told his date she could either have sex with him to get a ride home, or she would have to get out of the car and walk several miles in the dark along strange, lonely gravel roads to her dorm. There were no cell phones back then. When I heard his story, I thought, you son of a bitch. But I looked at him without making a sound. I'm sure he took my silence as an okay. 50 years later, I'm still ashamed of my silence. I was 20 then, but today, at 72, almost 72, my spine is stiff enough to call a spade, or, as in this case, a traitor a traitor. Pete Stauber isn't a 20-year-old college kid. He's a former policeman who has seen plenty of life. As a congressman, he twice swore before God to defend the Constitution and our democratic government. But Pete Stauber lied to God. He is a traitor hiding in a crowd of 147 other traitors, all of whom voted to overturn an honest election. Like his Republican associates, he deserves the greatest censure our nation can deliver. It can only be delivered in an election by people who find his actions as indefensible as they are. If I defeat Pete Stauber and get elected to Congress as a Republican, I will not give any of the re-elected traitors my vote for the leadership of Congress. They, like Pete, are phony Republicans dressed in sheep's clothing who conspired to cripple our democracy after the 2020 election. They took America for a ride in the country and gave her a choice of rape or a long walk back home in the dead of night. I'm getting out of their car, out of Pete's car. If you want to help unseat Traitor Pete, your best chance is to vote in Minnesota's August 9th primary. It's an open primary, meaning that Democrats, Republicans, and independents can choose a different party to vote in. If every one of them wanting to remove a traitor voted in the Republican primary, for me, Harry Welty, Pete Stauber would not be on the November ballot. Give it some thought.